Darius and Lyra moved quickly through the dim corridors of the spaceport, keeping to the shadows and avoiding the busy main paths. The buzz of the station's life felt distant to Darius, who was focused on only one thing: getting them out of there. Every step they took seemed to echo in the back of his mind, the silence between them thick with anticipation. He could feel the weight of the danger pressing in from all sides. They were being hunted. No matter how hard he tried to stay calm, the tension was impossible to ignore. Lyra was close behind him, her movements careful and quick. Her once hesitant steps had grown more confident with each passing moment, and though she still had traces of fear in her eyes, there was something else now: determination. Darius couldn't help but admire her strength. She had been through unimaginable horrors, and yet she was still fighting. She wasn't broken. Not yet. They reached a narrow passageway that led deeper into the spaceport. It was darker here, the lights flickering as if the station itself was struggling to stay alive. Darius could feel a growing unease as they ventured further into the unknown. His gut told him that they were getting closer to danger, but there was no turning back now. "I know a place," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder at Lyra. "A hidden port. If we can get there, we can escape the station. It won't be easy, but it's our best shot." Lyra nodded, her expression hardening. She trusted him, but Darius could see the question in her eyes. What if they didn't make it? The fear still lingered, but there was a glimmer of hope, just enough to keep her going. They continued on, the sounds of distant footsteps growing louder. Darius' heart raced as he slowed his pace, listening. It was hard to tell if the footsteps were coming closer or if he was imagining things, but he couldn't afford to take any chances. He pressed a finger to his lips, signaling Lyra to be quiet. They ducked into a small alcove just as a group of guards rounded the corner. Darius held his breath, his body tensed. He could see the guards' silhouettes through the narrow opening, their voices low and urgent as they searched the area. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched them pass by, unaware of the danger lurking just a few feet away. Once they were out of sight, Darius exhaled slowly. He turned to Lyra, whose golden eyes were wide with apprehension. She had been so close to being discovered, but now they had a brief window to continue. They couldn't waste it. "Let's move," Darius said in a whisper, urgency creeping into his voice. "We're almost there." They slipped out of the alcove and continued down the winding hallways. The sense of being chased lingered in the air, thick and oppressive. Darius' mind raced with strategies, plans to escape, to hide, to get them both out of this alive. But the further they went, the more he realized that their window of opportunity was closing. He could feel the pressure mounting, the danger growing. It wouldn't be long before the entire station would be looking for them. As they approached the hidden port, Darius felt a mixture of relief and dread. They were so close, yet so far from safety. He glanced at Lyra, seeing the determination in her eyes. They had made it this far. They couldn't stop now. They rounded the final corner, and the entrance to the hidden port came into view. But just as they were about to step forward, a voice rang out from behind them. "Stop right there." Darius sat next to Lyra, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. He kept his eyes on the door, his mind whirring with a million thoughts. They couldn't stay here long. The longer they stayed in this rundown building, the more likely it was that someone would find them. He couldn't risk it. Lyra had already been through so much, and he wouldn't let her fall back into the hands of those cruel people. She was quiet, still curled in the corner of the room, her knees drawn to her chest as she stared blankly ahead. Her silver hair cascaded around her like a veil, and her golden eyes had a faraway look, as if she were lost in thoughts she couldn't escape. Darius couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt for putting her in this position. She hadn't asked for this. No one should be forced into a life of captivity, to be sold or treated like an object. "I'm not going back," Lyra suddenly spoke, breaking the stillness in the room. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried an edge of finality. Darius turned toward her, surprised by the determination in her words. "You don't have to," he assured her, his tone gentle. "I won't let them take you again." Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with something new. Trust. She had been silent for so long, but now, for the first time, she seemed to believe him. The weight of her past was still there, lingering, but the fear had softened, replaced by a flicker of hope. She seemed to gather the strength to speak again, her voice quieter but stronger this time. "They called me a delicacy. That's what they always said," she began, her gaze drifting downward. "Like I was just something to eat, something to enjoy. But I'm more than that, aren't I?" Her voice cracked slightly, but she quickly composed herself, looking back at Darius. "I'm a person. I deserve to be free. And I won't let them make me feel like I'm worthless." Darius' heart ached for her. He could hear the pain in her words, the years of torment she had endured. He had always known the galaxy was full of darkness, but hearing her speak about her experience made him realize how deep the cruelty could run. He leaned forward, looking her straight in the eye. "You are worth more than anything they could ever offer," he said, his voice steady. "You deserve freedom. You deserve a life that's yours." She nodded slowly, the first real sign of strength he had seen from her. She was starting to believe it, starting to believe that maybe there was more to life than the nightmare she had escaped from. For the first time, Darius saw a glimpse of the person Lyra could become, someone who would fight for her own future. But as much as he wanted to believe that they were safe for now, Darius knew that the danger was far from over. They had to leave this place. There was no time to waste. He needed a plan, a way to get off the station without drawing attention. But where could they go? How could they escape the watchful eyes of the people hunting them? "I've got to get you out of here, Lyra," Darius said, standing up and pacing again. "We can't stay here much longer. We need to find a way off the station. I have a few contacts who might help, but it's risky. We'll need to move fast." Lyra stood up as well, the fear in her eyes replaced by a newfound determination. "I trust you," she said quietly, her voice steady now. "Let's go. I don't care where, as long as it's away from here." Darius gave her a small smile, feeling a surge of gratitude for her trust. It wasn't going to be easy, but together, they could make it. No matter what it took, they would find a way to escape the nightmare that had been chasing her. Darius carefully stepped back, keeping his eyes on the guards, but his mind was already racing. He could feel the weight of the girl in his arms, her fragile body still trembling with fear. Her golden eyes were locked on him, filled with gratitude but also terror, as if she wasn't sure whether to trust him or not. He wasn't sure how long he could keep this up. He needed to get her out of here, now. But he couldn't just walk out the front door without consequences. The guards were still eyeing him, and the waiter had made it clear that this wasn't over. Without a word, Darius turned and quickly moved toward the nearest exit, careful to avoid any sudden movements. The glass door slid open with a soft hiss, and he stepped into the dark, neon-lit streets of the spaceport. The air was thick with the hum of distant engines and the chatter of busy travelers. But Darius wasn't paying attention to any of it. His focus was entirely on the girl in his arms. He needed to find a place to hide, somewhere they could lay low for a while. But as he walked, a sense of dread began to settle over him. The quiet streets were far from safe. As they rounded a corner, Darius could feel eyes on them. He turned quickly, scanning the crowd. It wasn't just his imagination. He could see a few figures in the shadows, watching them closely. Maybe they were just other travelers, but Darius knew better. Word would get around fast. The restaurant had plenty of eyes and ears on the station, and they wouldn't take kindly to someone disrupting their business. He had to move fast, but not too fast. One wrong move, and they'd be cornered. "Where are we going?" the girl whispered, her voice shaking. She was clearly scared, and Darius couldn't blame her. She had no idea who he was or if she could trust him. He glanced down at her, her violet skin glowing faintly in the dim light. Her silver hair cascaded over her shoulders like liquid mercury, and her eyes, those golden eyes, were full of something more than just fear now. There was a hint of something else, something like hope. "I'm not sure yet," Darius replied, keeping his voice low. "But we'll figure it out. Just stick with me." They moved through the back alleys of the spaceport, avoiding the main thoroughfares where they might be spotted. Darius' heart pounded in his chest. His mind raced as he tried to think of a way out. The station was large, and they were far from the safety of his ship. He couldn't go back there. It was too obvious, too risky. He needed to find somewhere else, somewhere quiet. But it wasn't going to be easy. The streets were beginning to fill with more and more people, and Darius knew it wouldn't be long before someone noticed the missing delicacy. As they passed an old, rundown building, Darius noticed a faint glow from the window. It wasn't much, but it was enough to catch his attention. He glanced at the girl in his arms, then back at the building. It didn't look like much, but it could be a safe place. He made up his mind quickly. "Come on," he said, nodding toward the building. "We're going in there." The girl nodded, and they hurried toward the door. Darius pushed it open, the faint creak of the hinges barely audible over the sounds of the station. Inside, the building was dark and musty, filled with the smell of old metal and dust. But it was quiet. Safe. At least for now. Darius set the girl down carefully, looking around. It wasn't much. A small room with a few broken chairs and tables, probably abandoned for years. But it would have to do. He didn't know how long they had before someone started looking for them, but he needed a moment to breathe, to think. "You're safe for now," Darius said, trying to reassure her, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. He wiped the sweat from his brow and leaned against the wall, his mind still spinning. They had made it this far, but the hard part was just beginning. They needed to figure out what to do next, how to escape without being caught, how to get her the freedom she deserved. The girl, still shaken, looked up at him. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. I thought no one would come for me." Darius looked at her, his heart heavy. "I won't let them take you again. I promise." Darius stared in disbelief at the young alien girl lying on the plate before him, her silks flowing gently around her body. The restaurant's once elegant atmosphere now felt suffocating, as if the entire space was closing in on him. Her violet skin shimmered in the dim light, and her long silver hair seemed to glow as it fell around her delicate face. She looked so fragile, so human in her vulnerability, yet there was an undeniable otherworldly beauty about her. Her golden eyes locked onto his, full of fear and confusion. And for a moment, Darius felt a wave of guilt wash over him. This wasn't right. This wasn't just some exotic dish. This was something else entirely. The server, noticing Darius' stunned silence, smiled in a way that sent a chill down his spine. "The rare Zephyrin steak, Captain Voss," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "A delicacy of the highest order. Enjoy." He gave a mocking bow, then turned and walked away, leaving Darius alone with the girl. Darius shook his head, his mind scrambling to make sense of the situation. His hands clenched into fists as he stood up, stepping around the table to get a closer look at her. The girl, still lying on the plate, shifted slightly, her eyes wide with terror. "Please," she whispered in a soft, broken voice. "Help me." Her words were weak, but they sent a surge of determination through Darius. She wasn't some food to be consumed. She was a person, a living being in desperate need of help. Darius glanced around the restaurant, his gaze scanning the room. The other patrons were still eating, laughing, and talking as if nothing were out of the ordinary. They didn't seem bothered by the girl on the plate. Some were even watching with a twisted sense of amusement, as though they were witnessing an exclusive spectacle. Darius' stomach churned. How could they be so indifferent? How could they treat her like this? His mind raced, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a surge of anger boiling up inside him. These people were nothing more than monsters, treating sentient beings like objects, like commodities to be bought and sold. Without a second thought, Darius reached down and gently lifted the girl off the plate, cradling her in his arms. She flinched at his touch, but when she saw the look in his eyes, she relaxed slightly, her fear giving way to a glimmer of hope. "You're safe now," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if that was true. There was no telling what kind of trouble he was about to stir up by taking her, but he couldn't stand to leave her here. As he turned to make his way toward the door, the sound of chairs scraping against the floor echoed in the room. He spun around to see several of the restaurant's patrons standing up, their eyes narrowed in his direction. The waiter had returned, now flanked by two large armored guards. The look on the waiter's face had shifted from polite to cold and threatening. "Captain Voss," the waiter said, his voice low and steady, "I must ask you to put the Zephyrin back where it belongs. She is not yours to take." Darius' grip on the girl tightened, his jaw set in determination. "She's not a Zephyrin," he snapped. "She's a person, and I'm not leaving her here to be slaughtered." The guards stepped forward, their hands resting on the weapons holstered at their sides. The tension in the air thickened, and Darius could feel his pulse quicken. He had come here for a meal, not a fight. But now it seemed like he was about to get both. The waiter smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that made Darius feel like he was playing right into their hands. "You misunderstand, Captain," the waiter said, his tone dripping with amusement. "This is not a mere meal. This is a delicacy, one that is highly sought after. You can't just walk away with her." Darius' eyes flicked to the girl in his arms. She was trembling now, her body stiff with fear. He couldn't let them take her back, not after everything he had seen. He glanced around the room, calculating his next move. He wasn't about to start a firefight in the middle of a restaurant, but he knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. With a determined look in his eyes, he turned to the waiter. "You don't know who you're dealing with," Darius said, his voice calm but full of authority. "And I'm not letting you take her back." The tension in the air was palpable as the guard stepped forward, and Darius braced himself for what was to come. He had no idea how this was going to end, but he was ready to fight for her freedom. Darius' heart pounded in his chest as he locked eyes with the two guards closing in on him. He could feel the weight of their gazes, their hands resting on the hilts of their weapons, waiting for any sign of aggression. He was outnumbered and outmatched in terms of sheer muscle, but he had something they didn't: determination. The girl in his arms trembled, her fear palpable, but Darius knew he had to stay calm. She needed him now more than ever. "Don't come any closer," Darius said, his voice low but firm. His fingers brushed against the edge of his blaster, tucked away in a holster under his jacket. He didn't want to escalate the situation into a full-blown confrontation, but if it came down to it, he was ready to fight. The guards stopped, sizing him up with suspicion. One of them, a towering humanoid with skin like polished obsidian, raised an eyebrow. "You're in over your head, Captain Voss," the guard said, his voice like gravel, rough and menacing. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Darius' grip on the girl tightened, his eyes flicking between the guards and the waiter, who now stood smugly behind them. The waiter's expression was almost too calm, like he was watching a show unfold before him. "You've made a grave mistake, Captain," the waiter said, his voice cold. "This Zephyrin is worth more than you can imagine. She's not just a meal. She's an investment, a prize that's been carefully nurtured and bred. You can't just walk away with her like she's some stray animal." The girl, her face still pale with fear, looked up at Darius with pleading eyes. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew one thing: Darius was her only chance. Her voice, barely a whisper, trembled as she spoke. "Please, don't let them take me back. They'll kill me." Darius' stomach twisted at her words. His mind raced. He could feel the pressure mounting as the guards inched closer, but he refused to back down. He wasn't about to let these people treat her like property. She was a living being, not some prize to be collected. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I don't care what she's worth to you," Darius said, his voice cold and unwavering. "She's not for sale. She's a person, and I'm taking her with me." The waiter's smile faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. "I suggest you reconsider, Captain," he said, his tone turning sharp. "If you think you can walk out of here without consequences, you're gravely mistaken. You don't know who you're dealing with. We'll have the entire station after you. There's nowhere you can hide." Darius felt the tension building in the air, the subtle threat hanging over them like a dark cloud. But his resolve remained unshaken. He knew the risks. He was no stranger to danger. But this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about the girl in his arms. She had been treated like an object for too long, and he wasn't going to let that continue. Without another word, Darius made a move. He reached for his blaster, drawing it with practiced speed, his finger poised over the trigger. The guards flinched, but they didn't move. They were trained to respond to threats, but Darius wasn't aiming to kill. He just needed them to back off. "Stay where you are," Darius commanded, his voice sharp and filled with authority. The guards hesitated for a moment, their eyes flicking to the waiter for guidance, but the waiter only nodded slightly, a signal for them to comply. "Let him go," the waiter said, his voice smooth but firm. "We'll deal with him later." The guards exchanged a look, then reluctantly stepped back, their hands still resting on their weapons, but no longer advancing. Darius didn't lower his blaster, but his muscles relaxed slightly. He knew this was just the beginning. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for now, he had won a small victory. Darius took a slow step back, keeping his eyes on the guards. The waiter watched him, his face an unreadable mask, but Darius knew this wasn't the end. They weren't just going to let him walk away with the girl, but he would figure out his next move when the time came. For now, his priority was getting her to safety. "Come with me," Darius whispered to the girl, his voice soft but firm. "I'll get you out of here." She nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope, and for the first time since he had entered the restaurant, Darius felt like he was doing something right. Captain Darius Voss had seen many strange things in his time as a space explorer, but nothing quite like this. He had just docked his starship at Rhinon Station, a bustling spaceport known for its high-end restaurants and exotic offerings. After a long journey through asteroid belts and barren planets, Darius was craving something unique. He had heard whispers of a new restaurant in the heart of the station that promised a meal unlike any other, a place where the rich and powerful went to indulge in their most decadent desires. Curious and eager for a real meal, he made his way through the glowing streets of the station, his boots clicking against the metallic floors. The restaurant's name was The Celestial Feast, and it stood out even in the opulent spaceport. Its walls shimmered with translucent panels, and soft blue lights illuminated the entrance like a beacon. Darius stepped inside, immediately taken aback by the elegant decor. The air smelled of rich spices and strange herbs, a mixture of unfamiliar scents that teased his senses. The patrons were dressed in the finest fabrics, their eyes gleaming with wealth and power. He felt out of place in his worn military uniform, but he was used to standing out among the elites. A hostess greeted him with a polite smile, her dark skin shimmering under the restaurant's dim lights. She led him to a table near the large glass windows that overlooked the vast expanse of space. The view was breathtaking, and for a moment, Darius forgot about the dangers of the galaxy and simply enjoyed the serenity. The menu was unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was filled with exotic names and bizarre descriptions, dishes from planets he had never even heard of. Flesh of the galactic kraken, crimson venom delicacy, starfire essence steak. The names alone sent shivers down his spine, but it was the rare Zephyrin steak that caught his eye. The description promised a cut of meat so tender it could melt in your mouth, harvested from a creature native to the distant Zephyrin system. Darius, a man who had tasted every kind of meat the galaxy had to offer, knew he had to try it. He called over the server, a tall, pale alien with sharp features and an unsettling smile. "I'll have the Zephyr and steak," Darius said, his voice confident. The server's eyes twinkled in a way that made Darius feel uneasy, but he dismissed the feeling. "Very well, Captain," the alien replied with a slight bow, his tone almost too polite. "You are in for a rare treat." As the server left, Darius leaned back in his chair, looking around the restaurant. The patrons were busy talking in low voices, their conversations hushed and secretive, like they were all in on something that he wasn't. He couldn't help but wonder what made the restaurant so special. What could be so extraordinary about a simple steak? His curiosity only grew as time passed, and the anticipation of the meal built up in his mind. He had eaten the finest meals the galaxy had to offer, but this promised to be something completely different. After a few minutes, the server returned, carrying a large silver tray. Darius' stomach rumbled in anticipation, but nothing could have prepared him for what he saw. The server set the tray down in front of him with a flourish, and as the cover was removed, Darius' eyes widened in shock. On the plate, instead of a succulent piece of meat, was a young alien girl. She was lying there, covered in delicate silks, her eyes wide with fear. Her skin shimmered with a soft violet hue, her long silver hair flowing around her shoulders like a cascade of moonlight. The golden glow of her eyes locked with his, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Darius' heart skipped a beat. This was no ordinary meal. It was something far more sinister, something he wasn't prepared for. He stared at the girl, his mind racing. What was this? A mistake? Or was he in some twisted game he didn't understand? His instincts told him this wasn't just a simple dish. This was something else entirely, something that would change the course of his journey forever. Darius paced back and forth in the dimly lit room, his mind racing. The walls were cold, and the air smelled of decay, but it was the only place they had for now. The girl, whose name he still didn't know, sat quietly on a broken chair, her gaze distant, her golden eyes clouded with worry. She hadn't spoken much since they entered the building, but Darius could see the fear still lingering in her. She had been through too much for one person to handle, especially someone as young as her. He had no idea who she was or where she came from, but what he did know was that she was not a piece of property. She was a living, breathing being, someone with hopes, dreams, and a future that had been stolen away. He couldn't let them take her back, no matter the cost. The silence in the room was deafening. Darius stopped pacing and turned to face the girl, his voice softer this time. "What's your name?" he asked gently, hoping to break the ice, to give her something to hold on to. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with hesitation. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice faltered. She seemed unsure, as if she was still processing everything that had happened. Darius took a step closer, but he didn't want to scare her. He needed to earn her trust. "My name is Lyra," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her words were like a breath of wind, soft and fragile. "Lyra." Darius smiled faintly, a small moment of relief washing over him. "Lyra," he repeated. The name sounded like music to his ears, like it was meant to be hers. "I'm Darius," he said, offering her a small but reassuring smile. He could see a flicker of recognition in her eyes, but she didn't respond. Her gaze drifted to the floor, as if the weight of her situation was too much to bear. "I'm sorry," Darius added, his voice low. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never thought it would go this far." Lyra's eyes met his again, her expression unreadable. "You didn't know what they were doing to me," she said, her voice tinged with sorrow. "I wasn't just a dish for them. I was a prisoner, a slave, something they could control." She paused, as if the words themselves hurt her. "I've been in their hands for so long. I don't know how to live outside of it." The confession hit Darius hard. He could feel the weight of her words, the burden of everything she had endured. He clenched his fists, fighting the anger that bubbled up inside him. How could anyone treat another living being like this? How could they look at her and see anything but a person, a soul with a right to freedom? "You don't have to go back," Darius said firmly, kneeling down in front of her. "I won't let them take you again. I'll keep you safe. You have my word." Lyra looked at him, her golden eyes glistening with something he couldn't quite place. Fear, hope, or maybe both. She took a shaky breath, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore. I don't know if I can trust you." Darius reached out slowly, offering her a comforting hand. "I understand. I'm asking you to trust me, but I can't force you to. All I can do is show you that you're not alone. I'll protect you, no matter what." The room was silent for a long moment, and for the first time, Darius felt a sense of calm settle over him. Maybe they didn't have all the answers yet, but they had each other. And that, for now, was enough. Darius froze, his heart skipping a beat as the voice echoed through the hallway. "Stop right there." The words felt like a jolt of ice water, freezing him in place. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the dark corridor behind them. Emerging from the shadows was a group of armed guards, their uniforms dark and imposing, their weapons aimed straight at him and Lyra. For a moment, everything felt still. The noise of the spaceport seemed to fade, replaced by the pounding of Darius' own heartbeat in his ears. Lyra stood beside him, her posture tense, her golden eyes wide with fear. He could see it in her expression. Her fear wasn't just about being caught. It was about being taken back to that horrible place, to being treated like nothing more than a piece of meat again. Darius stepped in front of her instinctively, his hand going to his side, where his weapon should have been. But he had left it behind in his haste to escape. No weapon, he thought bitterly. They had no way out now, no real defense. "You're making a mistake," Darius said, his voice steady but firm. He didn't know if they would listen, but he had to try. "You don't want to do this. We're not here to cause trouble. Just let us go." One of the guards, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward with a sneer. "You're not going anywhere, scum," he growled. "That alien is our property, and you're coming with us. Now." Darius clenched his fists, holding his ground. "She's not anyone's property," he said, his voice rising slightly. "She's a person, not some object to be traded or sold. I won't let you take her." The scared man raised an eyebrow. "You've got a lot of nerve. You think you can just walk away with her? You're in way over your head." For a second, Darius thought they were going to shoot. The tension in the air was thick with the threat of violence. But then, something unexpected happened. Lyra, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Her voice, though shaky, was clear. "You can't have me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper at first, but growing louder with each word. "I'm not going back. I'll fight for my freedom." The guards hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. Darius noticed the change, the flicker of doubt in their eyes. Maybe they hadn't expected this. They were used to their prey being helpless, compliant. But Lyra wasn't that. She was strong, and Darius could see it now more than ever. "You heard her," Darius said, stepping closer to her. "She's not going with you. If you want her, you'll have to go through me." For a tense moment, neither side moved. It was as if the entire spaceport was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. And then, without warning, the first guard made his move, stepping forward to grab Lyra. Darius reacted instinctively. He shoved the guard aside with surprising strength, knocking him off balance. The other guards hesitated for a second, clearly not expecting a fight. That was all Darius needed. He grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her toward the hidden port entrance, his feet pounding the cold metal floor. But just as they reached the door, another voice rang out, this one deeper, more commanding. "Stop them." Darius turned to see more guards running toward them, their weapons drawn. This was it. There was no turning back now. He had to get her to safety, no matter the cost.